Hello and welcome to the I Can't Believe You Drew Up a 2 Point Conversion for Mark Andrews, of all people, also known as the Away Game Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Duran Pierpali, and I'm here with my co host, as always, or at least for 2 episodes, with Kyle Clements of Aces Sports Radio and also voice of the Southern Oregon Raiders football team. Kyle, how are you doing? How was your divisional football weekend?
It was good. Yeah, and I've been saying it on my show, but my last, I'd say, I don't know, 13, 14 weeks have been just me sitting my butt down on the couch and watching football for hours on end. So this really wasn't different, but we finally got some good games. You know, the wild card weekend, yeah, I think everyone deserves a pat on their back for making it through that. That was
Mm-hmm.
rough. And we finally got competitive games.
We certainly did, and I guess we'll just go ahead and start with the biggest story of the weekend. Obviously, as the resident Ravens fan here, I'm going to have a lot to say about this. But Kyle, what do you think of this Ravens Bills game?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was hyped up so much, and it did live up to the hype. Yeah, this was a great game. We're gonna get into the 2 point conversion with Andrews, obviously, but
Oh, we got a lot to get into.
something to note is the Ravens also went for two in the third quarter. Duran,
Mm-hmm.
if they take the PAT there, then they only need the PAT. In the fourth quarter, they don't even have to do the draw up the 2 point conversion, but. Yeah, Andrews was bad. The fumble in I believe he catches the ball on his fumble at about the 50 or the Ravens or excuse me, the Bills 45. And then he starts to run backwards for some reason. I don't understand why he doesn't have the speed to juke out the linebackers, let alone safeties. I don't know what the plan was, but ball security is everything, and that was a really bad fumble on his part. And that's probably what cost the Ravens the game. And if you're a Ravens fan, you have to be sick to your stomach. Derrick Henry is not going to get any younger. That might have been the best season Derrick Henry will have for the rest of his career. He might not touch what he did again this season. And if I'm a Ravens fan, I'm worried about that. I'm not so worried about Lamar. Yes, the first half was bad. I've heard all the sports media guys talking about it, about the first half, but I think he more or less made up for it in the second half. If you spread out the first half mistakes throughout the whole game, I think people are talking on TV about how Lamar had a pretty good game and just didn't do enough in the end to win it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the final numbers: 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 254 yards, over 10 yards per pass attempt by the end of the game, and even with the turnovers, .22 raw EPA per play, which is, I mean, astounding. I mean, if you know how expected points works, it's very, very punishing of turnovers. The first fumble near the red zone was worth -8 expected points, which of course is bigger than any one football play can obviously be, because of how that stat works. Um, yeah, boy, we got a lot to talk about here.
We have a lot to talk about.
We have,
Durant, let me lead you into a question
mhm.
here.
Uh-huh.
Let me start with
Sure,
a
sure.
question.
Let's,
I
yeah.
mean,
I've got a
are,
take
are
for you, but you give me your question first.
are you done with Harbaugh?
See, okay, that is one thing I was going to get into. See, here's the thing: coaching was not the problem in this game, and I was going to get into some tough talk for the flock. And the thing is that for as much as the sports media personalities are finally starting to hammer Lamar because a lot of them have been very protective of him in his playoff losses, and it's really only been take a shot. Nick Wright, first things first, who's really been critical of him and his playoff performances. Now he finally has enough of a resume of playoff failure that people are starting to look at it and go, I don't know about this. There's also been, on Ravens Twitter, on Ravens Discords, et cetera, et cetera, there's been a whole lot of shifting the blame. I even saw one guy go after the defense who, I mean, yeah, they couldn't stop the run in the first half, but they got a lot of stops in the second half and, really did their part. Okay, so to circle back on the question, coaching was not the problem in this game. They had a great game plan. But the thing is that if you're going to apply any skepticism towards, whether okay, actually, here's the real answer. I was done with Harbaugh when we went 0-2 to start the season because serious football teams don't do that. And frankly, the exact same thing should be applying to Zach Taylor in Cincinnati. I can't believe he's not gone. They went 0-3 to start the season, and that's been, I mean, both 0-2 and 0-3 have proven to be statistically lethal for your chances to make the playoffs. The Ravens managed to make the playoffs because they also managed to also be one of the best regular season teams ever by a lot of statistical measures. But yeah, no. So that's So I was done with Harbaugh at that point, and he did have at least one really great moment, which was his coaching in the Chargers game, where he just went at his brother over and over again with fire in his eyes. But this is a classic example of Harbaugh didn't have the fumble, Harbaugh didn't throw the pick, Harbaugh didn't have
Sure.
the drop, and Harbaugh didn't have the interception. He did call. I can okay. Here's one thing. Now that I'm really thinking about this, I can guarantee you that 2 point conversion for Andrews was a Harbaugh call, because that's not even a Monken play. We've been running that since Roman. And what's even worse, it's never worked. This goes back to 2021, when Harbaugh got a lot of flack for going for two to end games rather than going for overtime in games where we had no corners. Where it's like the idea is basically, okay, let's either win or just get the hell out of here. It's just, yeah, no, they've run this like, hey, short pass right to Andrews multiple times for 2 point conversions to win games, and it's never panned out. If I were to, it's kind of like on the balance of the season. I absolutely no longer think Harbaugh is a net positive. But it is also, again, in this game, he simply was not the problem. So if there are people who are saying, fire Harbaugh because of this game, and they weren't saying it the rest of the season, it's like, okay, what are, that's just shifting blame where it doesn't go.
Yeah, I agree, and I've said it before, but everyone who when their team loses in the playoffs it always goes for the coach. But
Mm-hmm.
then the question I ask is who do you go out and hire? Because let's say for a second the Ravens do fire Harbaugh. Let's say they fire him the day after the Super Bowl. Who do you go out and get? And you better hope that's a home run, because things could go south with a bad head coach with this organization. So I think the smart thing to do is to keep Harbaugh. I don't understand going for two in the third quarter. Anybody, like you said, who's blaming the defense, I think is out of their minds. The defense shut out Buffalo in the third quarter, allowed
Mm-hmm.
two field goals in the fourth. They were playing lights out the entire second half.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I will say, I do think that second field goal by Sean McDermott was a mistake, because I was thinking about it as the game happened, and I remember thinking, I looked back at my buddy after it, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm doing the decision matrix in my head here, and kicking the field goal is the only thing, aside from messing up your aside from messing up your fourth down call, that gives the Ravens a chance to win this game. So I'm not sure why you did it. But at the same time, yeah, no, I 100% just don't blame Harbaugh for this. I'd have to go back and explain all of the math, and I don't want to bore people, but I did support the decision to go for two. The first time that he did it, it does obviously lead to that situation as well. But it's one of those ones where it's like it just doesn't pan out it doesn't pan out in the long run the vast majority of the time, that being down one means that much better than being down two. So you'd rather tie the game. And of course, the other thing is like, there's the thing of, okay, so bad teams need to be more aggressive on fourth down to create the variance that destabilizes stable good teams. And I
Yep.
think that also applies to in-game situations where it's like, hey, you're getting outplayed here, and you need the big punch here that's like, hey, the Russian is cut, to where it's like, okay, you expose the vulnerability. I don't think the Ravens never held or tied the lead in that game, did they? So
No, they didn't.
that's the thing, is that's the thing they were gunning for. Yeah, I mean,
All right, I guess
yeah.
technically the Ravens did have the lead early, 7-0. But yes.
Oh yes, on the first drive. Well, that's the other thing. Also, I mean, I was going to mention that as well. We did actually come out to the 7 point lead early, but it's also the number one thing that always goes through my head whenever I watch these first drives now, is that it's like, okay, the scripting of opening drives has gotten so good that the vast majority of the time, not the vast majority of the time, but a lot of times you see one team score seven and then the other team score seven, and then it's like, I don't think a lot of people really think of it this way, but it's like when a team is 7-7, the game is 0-0. It's like, now the game actually starts, and then that just is what makes Lamar's first turnover so galling, is that it's like, okay, we had the scripted drive that went great, and then you immediately threw the worst interception maybe of your entire career.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
It was the worst INT of his career, and it sucks that it happened right there. And I saw Lamar's post game conference. I'm sure you did too. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
curse words. A lot of curse words.
I didn't watch the whole
In
thing, but he talked about not looking off the safety, and like, boy, I tell you what, I do feel like there's a lot of times where this game is very chaotic and people use jargon to cover up randomness. Like we talk, there's lots of things about like QB mechanics, delivery, and stuff like that. In this case, it kind of feels like the whole like looking off this. It basically it feels it. He says like, oh, I didn't look off the safety. It's like, brother, you threw that thing without looking. Like
Yeah,
that's basically what he's saying here is, yeah, I just threw that without looking. And it's like, you cannot, like, how do you get this far in your career, in the narrative of your career, where you've been so consistently accused of, by at least a certain group of people, of not being clutch in the playoffs, and you still manage to be so carefree in the moment that you overthrow your guy by 5 yards, and the only guy who even has a chance to catch it is a Bills defender. I mean, just what was he thinking? And there's been a lot of like things that have happened recently where people have where it's like a guy throws a pick and then immediately you see Orlovsky or whatever coming on Twitter and being like, yeah, that guy ran the wrong route. And like a lot of times that's true, but it's gotten so heavy to where it's like, guys, it's like the thing that makes Brady great, the thing that makes Manning great, I mean, especially Brady, frankly, when it comes to playoff situations, is that like a receiver goes the wrong place and he's fast enough and processes the information quickly enough to recognize, oh, I cannot throw this ball, or at least I need to throw it away. And that's something we haven't seen from Lamar, or frankly a lot of this generation of QB. It's only really Mahomes who seemed to have shown that ability to process the information so fast to go, oh, I have to do this. Brock Purdy has had flashes of it. Of course, I've got to mention him. But yeah, no, there's that. I guess the thing I was ultimately going to get around to is that, I've been very, very critical of EDC for his roster construction over the years. I think the fact that we got out of Lamar's rookie contract with one playoff win is galling and mostly a reflection of his roster building more than anything else. I've become very critical of Harbaugh this year after listening to critics of Harbaugh for years and then still being a supporter of him up until somewhere around last year. And, it's like, it wasn't EDC's fault. It wasn't Lamar's fault. It certainly wasn't the defense's fault. It wasn't Derrick Henry's fault. It really just comes down to Lamar. And the big thing is that for as scathing as I'm going to be of Andrews in a certain amount of time here, and I'm going to be scathing, his quality of play doesn't even come into the equation if Lamar just plays better in the first half. I mean, this is the exact same story that we saw at the beginning of the year where it's like, oh man, if we'd have just played cleaner ball, we would have dominated the Chiefs. If we'd have even had 2 turnovers or 1 turnover, we win this Bills game by 7 points. There's just no question about it. And it's just, it is absolutely sickening. It's stomach dropping. It really makes you, it's like, I don't know why I would even be excited about the regular season next year. Of course, you always say that in January, and then September comes around, you're just so glad football's back, you watch it again.
yeah,
But,
exactly.
yeah, it's gross. I mean, it's really bad, and there's been a lot of, like, blame deflecting from, Ravens fans, and it's like, they gotta hear
Sure.
this. It's like, this one is on Lamar. Last year,
Yep.
he took one of the best regular season defenses in the history of the NFL. He won one wild card game with it and then got blasted. Or not a excuse me. He won a divisional game with it, but then got blasted in the AFC Championship game. We were nowhere close to winning that game.
Yeah.
And then he took one of the best offenses in the history of the NFL this year. I mean, the Peyton Manning comparison is not just apt, it's now 100% correct. And so is the Rodgers comparison. Where it's like, dude, you've come to Jesus, please, because at this point, you are the reason that we have all these regular season wins, but you are also the reason we are losing playoff games.
Sure.
It's like when it's like, that's kind of the unfair thing about football is that the QB has that much impact, but like the QB has that much impact, and this all comes to Lamar ultimately.
Yeah. If you're a Ravens fan, you almost wish that you were down by 1 and Tucker missed the kick. Then you could say, hey, Tucker's walked. We knew it all year. We get a new kicker next season, and we're Super Bowl bound.
I forgot to mention him. Tucker has the worst season of his career. Comes in, nails the short field goal, nails a 47-yarder in bad weather, which is exactly the kick he made at the end of the Mile High Miracle game to make his career. So yeah. He showed up. He, just literally everybody not named Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews showed up. And that's, and that's really damning of where the team is at right now, because it's like, okay, well, Harbaugh was good, except that we were 0-2 to start the season, which means that we had to play starters in week 18, which means that Zay Flowers was out, which means that we had to call more plays to Andrews than that some of those would have gone to Zay Flowers. So that's bad. Yeah. And then you have Lamar, whose place, speaks for itself. And then you have Andrews, and it's like, those are the top three names of this era of Ravens football. Those are the guys. And in their own ways, did not show up.
Yeah, no, they didn't. And with Andrews, Duran, with Andrews, you have to take a look at Andrews and his play, and you have to be very Belichickian about it. About what have you done for me lately?
Agreed.
Let me tell you this: if Andrews was a Patriot and this team happened 10 years ago, he's cut the next day. He doesn't even make it back to clean out his locker. So, you have Isaiah Likely, fantastic tight end. I see no reason for Andrews to be on the roster next season, and that's not recency bias either.
I was thinking about this, and I'm glad I came up with this before we started recording. It's very possible that the worst thing to happen to the Ravens this year is that Mark Andrews went from his beginning of the season slump to all of a sudden starting to score touchdowns. Because if he had continued slumping, he'd be the tight end 2 in this game, and we would have called more plays to Isaiah Likely, who was lights out in this game, blocking and catching.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
And I mean, I guess I have to reveal, I have never been a Mark Andrews fan. Granted, I was kind of out of NFL fandom for a while, mostly just because I was very poor. I didn't really have a TV. I didn't really have access to the games. I would just look at the box scores. First real game I really got to pay attention to, in a long time, was the now really famous 2019 Ravens Seahawks game, which I went to a bar and watched with my dad when he came to visit. And that's the famous, Lamar, do you want to go for it? Hell yeah, coach, let's go for it game. What a lot of people have now forgotten is that that's a game where Andrews dropped like 2 or 3 different touchdowns and got benched.
Yep.
And he hasn't been benched ever since, but his hands have never gotten better. And God, this is the ranty part of the day. How the fuck do you play tight end? And the worst part about you is your hands. You're a tight end. You're supposed to be the security blanket. How can you be the security blanket if we can't reliably throw at you in must-have situations? That's what makes you a tight end, as least as a receiver. He's a tremendous blocker. He's always been, maybe, it's like him and Kittle for the best blocking tight ends in the league. But blocking is now the sugar on top when it comes to tight end. You've got to be a reliable receiver in these situations. And aside from us being down a receiver, which means we have him out there running routes, he's got just unbelievably bad hands at times, and he's got the catch radius of a G.I. Joe doll. If his hips have to swivel at all to make a catch, you're screwed.
Yeah, and Duran, that the 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter at the end of the game to him, how much more open can you be? Yeah, I mean, there's not a defender. There's not a defender with the ball be.
His feet are sliding out from beneath him, but you've been playing in those conditions all day. And more importantly, just how do you not have it? And maybe this was in his head and maybe it worked against him rather than for him, but it's like, you've messed up this play so many times. The Ravens had a losing record, or it was either had a losing record or missed the playoffs in 2021 or 2022 because of this exact play. Where it was like Green Bay or something. And, I always forget these games. I tend to memory hold the bad football, as I think a lot of people do. But, but people with better memories will recall the exact games I'm talking about where they went for 2 with Andrews at the end. And it's like, he did win the All-Pro that year. But, the big thing was like, it's like, yeah, I mean, he was the best offensive player on the team, but it was still him coming up, in that situation, he came up short to be the hero. Not that I expect a tight end to carry you to the playoffs, but that also says a lot. Tom Brady had Gronkowski, Mahomes has Kelsey, Brock Purdy does have George Kittle, and so did Jimmy Garoppolo, but it's like, there's just, there's always been, it's always been frustrating, because what people have always said since 2019, 2 things. One, Mark Andrews is a top 5 tight end. I'm sorry, name 4 and 5. Because, it's like there's Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and then who else? It is not a deep tight end league right now. It's getting deeper. There's Sam Laporta. Brock Bowers was obviously insane this year, but it's like, we're not like in a great era of tight end play in the way that we're in a great era of QB play or a great era of wide receiver play. I don't want to hear this stuff about him being. It's like, okay, when you're top five, that doesn't matter when only the top two guys are actually elite. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, I agree.
and then this is like really relitigating some old stuff, but I've got to take a victory lap here, which is like, you go on Twitter and you say, oh man, Lamar's got no weapons back in 2019. And some goober comes up to you and says, well, he's got Mark Andrews. It's like, yeah, that guy, this guy who lost, who like, let's just be real, lost this game late when Lamar, oh, and this is the take I wanted to give you. Let's pivot a little bit. This is, I don't know how you're going to feel about this. I would say that Lamar's quality of play in the second half, as bad as I thought he was as he was overall in this game, he passed the Brady test. By which I mean, there's so many playoff games where Brady had a brutal first half or even had a brutal first three quarters, had multiple turnovers, but then he locked in. He just absolutely locked in, and he made all of the right plays, and they somehow ended up winning, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. And that's exactly what Lamar did in this game, where it's like, okay, he had a horrible game, but he was just about to go down there, and he also, even at the very end, put the ball right on the money for Andrews to make it. It's like, it's like Lamar did, at the end, do what they needed to do to prevail in spite of his own quality of play, and Mark Andrews just couldn't get out of his own way. It's been very, very frustrating. But I wonder what your kind of take is on this whole thing of like the Brady test of like, okay, can you be bad for half of a game and then do what you need to do for the team to win?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% that he passed the Brady test. I mean, asking a quarterback to go into a road playoff game for a chance to go to the AFC Championship game and not turn the ball over is that's a tall ask.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks are going to turn the ball over. It's going to happen. But he rebounded very well. He put them in a position to win the game. And, if you want to point a finger, point it at Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews lost you this game. Mark Andrews is the reason the Ravens aren't going to have a shot at the Chiefs for a little bit of revenge for that week one game where Likely's foot was barely off the line. And Mark Andrews is the reason the Ravens are going to Cancun. That it's plain and simple. It's not Lamar's fault. It's not Harbaugh's fault. It's certainly not the defense's fault either. So yeah, sometimes football's that simple though, Durant. Sometimes you can point the finger and blame one person, and in this case, you can.
Yeah, that's the thing is that especially just to circle back on Lamar. I know these advanced stats are not just flawed but even very flawed, but they're still very insightful. The two Lamar turnovers on their own were worth a combined like 34% win probability. Like literally, the fumble in the first turnover wasn't so bad because plays early in the game are not going to affect win probability like plays later in the game as you would expect. But like just the turnover, the fumble in the red zone, which we haven't even talked about, which is a galling play, just fall on the ball. Don't try and do stuff you would do in week 4 against the, or whatever week it was against the Bengals. Don't try your Kevin Harlan bullshit in the playoffs. Okay. Anyway, that one play, I did the math on it, was worth 22 points of win probability. It's like, that was like a quarter of an L just off of that play alone. And I get that they didn't actually score any points off of that turnover, but it's like, you only get 9 possessions. I looked at this up. Both teams got 9 possessions, and you need to score on about half of them to win probably. And that's, God, I'm trying to be like really composed about this, but this is an unbelievably frustrating game to watch. And
yeah.
I think is a good point to close this, before we move on, because I don't think I have really anything else original to say about it. Here's something. The Baltimore Colts were established in like 1947 or 48. I forget exactly. No. It was earlier than that. It was a little later than that. I don't remember the exact years. 1958, they win the championship. 1959, they repeat. 1964, they go back to the NFL championship. 1967, they have one of the best teams ever, but there's no wild card, so they don't make it, even though they're a 12-1-1 team. They play in Super Bowl III. They famously get trounced by the Jets. They play in Super Bowl V. It's a very, very ugly game, but they win. That's 1971. In 1984, the Baltimore Colts left Baltimore and went to Indianapolis. It has now been 12 years. And people were hoping, it's like, oh, well, it's been 12 years, just like it had been 12 years since the last Super Bowl. And now it'll be 13. If we go for this is going to sound silly to complain about, but I think you as a Patriots fan will understand it, when you have a team with high standards. If we don't win a Super Bowl next year, it will be the longest stretch in the history of NFL football in Baltimore without a championship, assuming that a team is actually in town.
Yeah, that's wild to think about.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because obviously you have
and
96, and then 96 the Ravens come in, 2000 we win, 2012 we win, and then there's just been so many opportunities where people thought we're the team this year, and it just hasn't happened.
yeah.
And it's like, you don't the God, I think. I'll say this. One of the reason Ravens fans are so antsy is I think they really do. For one, I don't, even though it happened before any of us were born, the Colts thing, I think people do remember. The Ravens are never leaving town. They're too profitable. But, there definitely is like the antsiness of like, oh, well, if we're not good, then, then what's the point? But also, the bigger thing is you don't want to become the Dallas Cowboys. Every franchise, for as good as they are, eventually goes through 20 or 30 years of not mattering at all. And
Yeah.
And it's like every Ravens fan knows that we're on the cusp of that. We're just absolutely on the cusp of that, and the only way to stave it off is to win another championship and to keep the organizational momentum going for a little bit longer. Because again, it's like especially after Lamar retires, it feels almost inevitable that like we're just not going to keep getting lucky with draft picks and coach hires. Yeah.
Duran, I will
Anyway,
say,
go ahead.
I think you're getting a little doomerish, a little too doomer on your boys in Baltimore.
They're going to leave the town. They're going to leave the city, dude.
I think that's getting pretty heavy, doomer. Listen, Lamar's going to be back next season, and when I think of quarterbacks in the NFL in the playoffs, I think of the confetti test, right? And I think it was you who told me this. That
I
can
did.
you envision this quarterback with confetti falling around him, holding the Vince Lombardi Trophy? With Lamar, yes, I
Absolutely.
can, absolutely. So you know what? You wrap it up. You put a bow on this season. You go. Ravens obviously have some holes in the roster they need to address come draft time, but you run it back with everybody and you see what happens.
And I'll give you some positives to counterpoint all the doominess that I just gave you, because I do tend to I do tend to get that way a little bit. Assuming Todd Monken doesn't get a head coaching job, which he has gotten interviews, but he didn't get the Bears job, which he was interviewed for because Ben Johnson got it. We'll talk about that in a second. Assuming Todd Monken doesn't get a job, offensive continuity in the system. Lamar's still there. Andrews may be still there, but even if he's not there, Isaiah Likely's there. Zay Flowers still there. Rashad Bateman's still there. Derrick Henry, I think, is still at least a 2 or 3 year contract. And frankly, he may be aging, but the blocking is still going to be good, probably. So the big thing is that I think there's going to be some offensive line problems, but I mean, we thought offensive line was a problem at the beginning of this year, and they managed to put it together. The system and a lot of the offensive skill players are the same, and I'm of the modernist mindset that that's really the most important building block to continued success in the NFL. So there's no reason to believe that the Ravens won't be at least a 9-win team next year, and I think that's obviously on like pretty much the bottom end of it. But it's just brutal to have this, to have 2 years where you basically, in one way or another look like the best team in football, and it just doesn't pan out to really anything. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay. So we're going to establish a new rule here. If we didn't see a game, we're not going to talk about it. If neither of us saw a game, we're not going to talk about it at all. We're not going to bullshit the audience. And if one person saw a game, they're going to talk about it a little bit, and then the other person maybe will offer some color. But it's like we're not going to be pushing takes about stuff we didn't see, because that's just it's lazy. So in the spirit of that, I actually would appreciate if we could do Rams and Eagles first. Can you give us, you did get to see this game. I didn't get to see any of it. What do you think of Rams Eagles?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Commanders are very alive this weekend when they travel to Philadelphia, is what that Eagles game left me with. Sirianni mismanaged the clock so horribly in the final 4 minutes that it was unbelievable that the Rams had the ball with a chance to win. They were dead in the water in this game for so long. It seemed like throughout the entire third quarter, just dead, dead, dead. And then they get some stops. They move the ball down the field. They score, and yeah, if you're the Eagles, I guess a positive is this time. You don't have AJ Brown sitting on the sideline reading a book. I mean, I guess that's the positive you take if you're an Eagles fan. But besides that, it was awesome because it was a snow game. First of all, love a good snow game. Hertz
Hmm.
was he not a lot of throwing, only 128 yards through the air. They ran it with Saquon. He ran for another 205 yards. Saquon owns the Rams. He did that again earlier this season. Cooper Cup has all of a sudden become like wide receiver 4 on this team. I think it's safe to say he's damaged goods at this point,
That ACL
and
ruined him in a way that we
it
haven't.
ruined him.
It,
If
it,
I'm the
it
Rams, if I'm
yeah.
the Rams, I move him immediately.
It,
I'm done with Cup if I'm Los
and
Angeles.
it's funny because we haven't seen an ACL ruin a guy like that in almost, it feels like, a generation. The ACL went from like a career ruiner to like, yeah, he's going to be out for 9 months and he's going to be great again,
Yeah.
and then with Cooper Cup, it was old school. I mean, he went down, and maybe it was just the super heavy workload of the 2021 season, but yeah, no, that's one of the more fascinating stories, is that he looked like he was gonna like establish him. Like it's like he had the 2021 season where he was the Triple Crown, had maybe the best wide receiver season of all time, and then people are looking at his Pro Football Reference page and they're going, "Wow, this guy has always had good stats. He's just never broken out in this way." And so people like me are going, "Can this guy make the Hall of Fame?" And that's over. I mean, I mean, God bless. I mean, he'll probably ultimately make the Rams Ring of Honor for winning that Super Bowl MVP, and
Yeah,
he'll and
he's
he'll
he's
yeah,
not a Hall of Fame wide receiver.
no,
If Edelman's not a Hall of Fame wide receiver, this cat
no, no.
this cat's not a Hall of Fame wide receiver. But yeah, Elliott had a little bit of a redemption as well in this game. A lot of Eagles fans were pissed off at Jake Elliott going into
Mhm.
this game. He had cost them earlier in this season on a few games, but he made good on it. 23 yards, 37 yards, both in the fourth quarter, both in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
Rams scored super late to Parkinson, but yeah, that was it. Eagles defense stood tall on the final drive of the game. Rams had 402 total yards too.
Wow.
Stafford, for as immobile as he was, he got the ball down the field. But I, I,
How
I
many
think that's pretty
turnovers?
much all there is to say about this one.
Do you know how many total turnovers the Rams had?
Yes, I believe they had one. I believe it was
Just the Kyron
Kyron,
Williams fumble?
the Kyron Williams fumble. I believe that was his seventh fumble of the season.
Oh wow, brutal. Yeah, that was actually this was a narrative that emerged over divisional weekend, is that, man, safe beat explosive all weekend, because literally all four of the winners had less total offensive yards than the losers. And pretty much the connection was that I don't think all of the winners had zero turnovers, but all of them had less turnovers than their opponents. And
Yeah, and
that
Stafford
is
fumbled as well. Stafford fumbled in
there
this
you go.
game. I'm forgetting about. Yeah, he got strip sacked.
Yeah, no, that is one of the really really sickening things about playoff football, is that it's just, it's so punishing of mistakes that it does make you play a lesser brand of the game than you usually would during the regular season, just to avoid risk. And that's obviously one of the things that made the Patriots so winning, but also, so aggravating to a lot of people. But it's just, it seems like the further and further we get with offenses getting more and more advanced, it's still ultimately every 10 years or so we have a recession, basically, of offense, where it just comes down to, man, 4-4-2, as in, 4 yards first down, 4 yards second down, 2 yards, and then, we keep it moving. So
Yeah.
all right, go ahead and move on to Lions Commanders. First half of this game might have been the best half of football all year. It was, I mean, I think the spread on this one was somewhere around 52 points, just like the Ravens and Bills game, and they had covered it by the end of the first half. Um, am so heartbroken for the Lions, because I really believe in Dan Campbell.
Yeah.
I really, I really think I really do think one of his positives, even if people think the crying is bad, I do think that him coming out and being like, they asked him about 12 men on the field, and he said, "That's my fault. That's my fault." I mean,
Yeah.
and he wasn't, like, punching himself in the face about it or whatever, and he wasn't, secretly throwing other players under the bus. He was just like, "Hey, this was on me." I just this is just, I mean, like, this isn't going to be advanced analysis, but this really was just another game where the quarterback let the team down, because if Jared Goff had thrown, like, even one less interception, and granted, they did give the ball to Jamison Williams late to throw, but that was also, Ben Johnson got a lot of crap for that. And he's going to get clowned on it, during the entire offseason that, he said the well is deep. And then eventually he went so deep in the well that he, gave the ball to the, but Goff already had, I think, 3 interceptions by that point, or 2 interceptions and a fumble. I don't remember the exact numbers, but, it's like at some point you just, you run out of ammo to shoot. And so you load the rock with a gun. So you load the gun with a rock. It just, this was such a tragic downfall for the Lions, who, and here's another one, when you talk about playoff truisms, is that, a lot of times safe beats explosive. Boy, I tell you what, nothing will expose, there's nothing the playoffs will expose like a quarterback mismatch. And, the Commanders play a very similar brand of the Lions football, where they do go for it every single fourth down that's good. And so they were a basically unstoppable offense all game, because every time they had 4th and 2, they went for it and got it. Jaden Daniels is the real deal. There's just no getting around it. Jaden Daniels is the real deal. I think if you were to go back and dig, it'd be hard to, if this isn't the best rookie season in the history of the sport, then it's very, very close. I don't think any quarterback has combined eye test statistical dominance in the regular season, playoff wins, and playoff statistical dominance, on top of not having great run support, not having great defensive support. He's a legend in the making. And he came up huge in all of these moments, and it's so brutal, because the culture that the Lions have established, it's so very much part of their culture, that instead of cutting Goff and trying to move on from him immediately, that instead they said, hey, you can be the guy. We believe in you. We love you. Go out and do it. And just in this game, it's just, you saw the ceiling. They hit the ceiling super duper hard, and the ceiling is a team that's like you but has a better quarterback. It was just I mean, as a fan, basically as a fan of the Lions, this was so gross to see. It was so sad.
Yeah, Lions fans have to be sick to their stomachs right now. Goff 3 interceptions, and not only do they get the 1 seed, not only do they get a bye week, but they get
The
a
best
home
Lions
playoff
team ever.
game.
The best Lions team ever.
And you get ran over for 28 points in the second quarter. I mean, oh my God. Sean McVay knew what he was doing when he sent Goff away to get Stafford. He knew what he was doing. He played a Super Bowl with Goff as his quarterback. I think McVay had some serious, tough conversations with people in the front office and said, hey, this guy cannot win a Super Bowl. That was his ceiling, and he can't do it. Jared Goff will never win a Super Bowl, Durant. He just won't. He's not good enough. He doesn't have the poise to do it. He doesn't pass the confetti test for me either.
No.
313 yards is great, but you turn the ball over 3 times, and that's what you get. Amon-Ra went crazy as usual, by the way. 8 catches for $137. Gibbs had
God.
2 touchdowns, so it's not for a lack of offense. But I almost wonder if this game falls almost a little more on Goff than anyone else. I guess you could say
that's how
Campbell.
I'm framing it.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
that's the thing I was going to get to, is that, see, if the narrative last year was, oh, were they too aggressive? Or actually, on the flip side of it, some people questioned how they actually punted and or kicked a field goal on one of their 4th downs, and then ended up having to go for it later, which is a very Andy Reid type move. So it was basically, it's like, hey, were you either overcommitted to your bit, or did you forget who you were in the big moment? And the thing is that, he didn't even get the chance. Like, Dan Campbell did not get a chance to lose this game by mismanaging, because all he did was believe in the guy that he's believed in the whole time, and got let down. And that's just such a brutal blow. I've already said this, but that's such a brutal blow for what I think is fair to say is the most optimistic and loving. I'm not really sure that like the Ted Lasso, that was the comparison a lot of people made early on after Dan Campbell, where it's just like where the Lions have just been a TV show, a movie, and it feels like they've hit the hard ceiling of that particular version of the brand, because now if they really want to get serious about winning a Super Bowl, I agree, they're going to have to move on from this guy. He just there's just been enough of him in big moments where you see and you go, yeah, he can carry you to a certain point, and especially with good offensive play calling, he can carry you to a certain point. But especially with Ben Johnson gone now, I mean, it's kind of all hands on deck. If they want to stay relevant next year, they're going to have to make serious changes. And I think Campbell is going to have to make a lot of heartbreaking phone calls. Or maybe not even a lot of them. I think just to one. I think he's going to have to talk to Jared and say, look, we love you for everything you've done for this team and for what you've done for the city, but it's just, there's got to be accountability too. There's just, we can't be so soft on accountability that we ignore that you were basically the reason we lost this game, or at least you're the reason we lost this game by, what felt like 30 points. So
yeah, absolutely. If I'm the Lions in the front office, I might be a little more ruthless than them. I would be looking at suitors for Jared Goff as soon as this offseason. Lions fans may disagree with that, but I saw what I saw with my own two damn eyes. I saw what I saw. He's an okay to good quarterback that's going to shrink when the lights are brightest. Now, I'll tell you what's going to happen versus what I would do. What's going to happen is Dan Campbell is loyal to a fault, and he's going to run it back with Jared Goff.
Yeah, well, you know what? I do think I looked at his cap hits, and I do know that next year is the last year that he still has a relatively small cap hit. I think he's like 18 million next year. But then, because of the extension that they signed, he's like over 50 million a few years from now. And granted, that's not going to be as big of a hit on the cap because the cap's going to keep going up, as people say. But it's still going to be a huge percentage either way. And I think they're going to look at, especially, we're in a new age when it comes to quarterbacks and massive contracts, where it's like, hey, and this is kind of a thing I've pitched forever, and teams seem to be catching on. Not that I'm brilliant, but I've often said, if you're paying big money at a position, you need to get production out of that position, no matter where the production's actually coming from. That's what the Browns did, about 2 years ago, where it's like, okay, we've got Deshaun on the roster. We're going to find other guys. We're going to find ways to get production out of this position because we're paying so much money to the position, even if it's not going to the right guy. If they can find a team who's willing to go 25-25 on Jared Goff, or rather 50-50 on the split, to where one team is paying 25 and the other team is paying 25, or they might even go, depending on how next year goes, they might go the way of the Broncos and say, screw it. Yeah, we made a mistake extending Jared Goff. We're going to have to cut him. We're going to have to pay him a lot, but we're going to draft a rookie quarterback. And if we have a play caller anywhere near as good as Ben Johnson, he could probably get just as much out of Jared Goff because, he had a moment this year. This was the best year he's ever played, but it's like, yeah, and, system guy, basically. And there are a lot of system guys available.
Absolutely, and it's sickening for Detroit. You lose Ben Johnson now. You're probably going to lose your DC as well. So you got to go out and make.
I know that they were down a lot of defensive starters. I have no idea how Aaron Glenn gets a job off of this game. That's just ridiculous.
Oh, I think he'll get a job offer. I could see.
I know everybody's saying it, but it's the same thing. Go ahead.
Wouldn't it make too much sense to wake up tomorrow morning to a notification that the Raiders have hired him as their head coach?
Oh my God,
wouldn't it just make too much sense?
Oh, what a goof that would be. Oh my goodness.
Wouldn't it just make too much sense?
It would make a tremendous amount of sense. Or God forbid, the Jaguars head coach. Like, hey, we're gonna, we need to fix Trevor Lawrence. We're gonna hire the guy that once pissed next to Ben Johnson in the year.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of puts a bow on the Lions season. I think the Commanders are very alive when they go to Philadelphia, and Jaden Daniels quietly having one of the best rookie seasons as a quarterback of all time. This guy's insane.
Like I said, I mean, I'm not a huge expert on rookie seasons. I think it might have just be flat out the best. I mean, people think they're alive to make the Super Bowl, and there have been rookie quarterbacks that have taken their teams to conference championship games, but the last name I can remember that did it was Joe Flacco, and everybody knew that he was the weak link in that team. Jaden Daniels is the reason they're good. I mean, Terry McLaurin has been an amazing receiver on the Commanders for many, many years, but it's only been with Jaden Daniels that his production has exploded, and it's basically as far as I can tell, they're the only two really elite players on that team, and they're just out there making it happen. Game after game. I talked last week about how, there were Commanders fans crying in the stands in Tampa because they'd never seen. The crying's over now. They're going to start talking shit.
Yeah, exactly. And they should. Yeah, absolutely they should. I
I
cannot wait for this Commanders Eagles game though, Duran. Yeah, there's so many storylines. If Sirianni loses this one at home,
Oh, that'll be so sweet.
I mean, there's so many storylines. And the cool thing for the Commanders is you're playing with so much house money at this point. You
Hmm.
have beating Tampa going into this Detroit game, they were already playing with house money. Now it's exponentially, it's tenfold what they're playing with.
Yeah, and the thing is that I mean, you got the Eagles, and I know how bad the Lions got did by this is I know every sports media guy does this at least once. If they were playing the Lions, I'd be a little afraid, or at least I'd be much more afraid than I am now. The Eagles have got to be the weakest looking presumable Super Bowl team that I've ever seen. Where I mean, like we're just I mean, like the safe bet would be the safe bet. The safe bet is that the Eagles are going to be in the Super Bowl, right? Because the Commanders are so young, they don't have the depth. It's like not ready to win yet. So we assume that they probably make the Super Bowl over the Commanders. But they look so gettable in that Super Bowl, and they look so gettable here. I mean, they're just they're a culture that's in absolute disarray. They have a quarterback who, the further that we get away from it, it kind of really seems like he only ever really had one great season, and a wide receiver who hates him, and they've just got a running back, and the running back is having one of the best running back seasons ever. But if you stop him, then the kingdom could be yours.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a simple formula. You got to stop Saquon, and can the Commanders do that? I
Not
think
sure,
holding
but
did I think Detroit I think holding Detroit to 31 points is somewhat remarkable by the Commanders defense. I was kind of expecting Detroit to hang 40 plus on them.
yeah, you
So
did
I
say
think
that.
I think that's a small victory for the Commanders as well to take into Philly. I want to switch up really quick and talk Kansas City really quick, and then
Yeah,
do our conference championship
yeah, we'll
picks.
wrap this one up.
But with KC, I don't want to spend too much time on the ref because as a Patriots fan, I know that we got the benefit of the doubt many times.
Okay, good.
I mean, my mind runs to Miles Jack in that 2018 conference championship game against the Jaguars.
Hmm.
My mind runs to the new many roughing the passer calls on Tom that maybe were a little questionable. Some holdings in generous times as
I
well.
I don't
So
remember. I don't remember any of the Patriots. Well, I don't remember any of the Patriots ones in specific. But the one that'll stick with me forever, and that I really have a hard time forgiving, is the 2020 Super Bowl when he's playing in Tampa Bay, and he throws a pick, and the pick comes back on a penalty, and then he
yes,
leads them a little further downfield, and they kick a field goal. And the field goal either makes or miss, I don't remember, but then there's a penalty on the field goal, and then this motherfucker throws a touchdown. He goes from having a pick on a drive to having a touchdown, and it was like,
yeah,
and he's playing at home, and a thing that did not get enough commentary from that game, they just let the regular crew call that game. Like that was the most home cooked. There's a lot to respect in Brady's career, but like if anybody's going to try and tell me that like that Super Bowl is like, oh, that should have cemented him as the GOAT, it's like, I don't know. I mean, Kansas City had no offensive line, wasn't allowed to play defense. Anyway, yeah, but the big thing to really get back to actually the meat of this situation, Kansas City was so much better than Houston. Houston was so
yep,
gettable all year.
yep,
They were gotten many times this year. They looked so
yep,
much worse. The first thing that they're talking about after the game is the refs, which is the thing that soft teams say when they lose across all of history, across all of sports. And
absolutely.
and you look at the actual advanced stats, you look at win probability, you look at expected points, you look at all this stuff, and it just ultimately tells you the thing you already know, which is that these penalties were not the reason you lost. Even after these penalties, like, okay, after the first roughing the passer penalty, you still had the opportunity to stop them, and you didn't. And the thing, if you don't want to celebrate it, then whatever. But, let's not forget the big play of this game is Patrick Mahomes falling down, falling forward, and completely off base, throwing a touchdown to Travis Kelce, who is somehow, once again, even despite being 55 years old, wide open. This, I guess I was waiting to see Kansas City win a playoff game, to where it's like, okay, I need to see them do it when it matters. They really did if you really think about it, they really did dominate this game, and it really does feel like what the Chiefs fans have been saying all year has been true, which is that they've just been waiting for the moment to really let it out. This team, I mean, you look at the four teams that are left. I don't know. I don't know how anybody's stopping them. So, I mean, unless you have more to say about it, I guess that can lead into our picks.
Yeah, I mean, even if all those calls that went in the Chiefs' in the Chiefs' favor, excuse me, did not,
Mm-hmm.
the Chiefs still win that game. I
Yeah.
mean, they're the better team. The Texans were kind of playing with house money. They were a poor team all year. C.J. Stroud, I guess, kind of showed us that he still got a pretty decent ceiling in that playoff game against Kansas City in the second half, but uh, kind of a miserable season for the Texans, with all things considered, Durant, with how well Stroud's rookie season went, with his connection with Nico Collins. The defense started to pick it up towards the end of the year, and then they just fall on their face.
Yep. Oh, and of course, actually, since we're talking about officiating, it should be mentioned. I'm not going to focus on this, even though it really was almost a game-changing play. Go back to Baltimore and the Bills. There was that defensive pass interference that, to anybody with eyes, was obviously an offensive pass interference. And like any bad call, it had its 5 minutes on Twitter. But the difference between them and the Chiefs, and the Bills get plenty of calls too, especially Josh Allen, who has the most roughing the passer penalty since being drafted
Oh,
by a lot,
ab-
and Mahomes is in the
absolutely,
middle. Yeah, because he's
and
the
and,
flopper of all time, to be honest.
and Josh Allen also has referees running over to the sideline to
Yeah, to
apologize to him
apologize to him.
to
Yeah,
his face.
but it's only when it's the best team in the league that people really hyper fixate on it. And I'll admit, I was a bit of a whiner about this when it came to the Patriots as well. But it's like you learn your lesson, because now the dominant team is one that I don't find dislikable, and I see all of these people who are just, it's like every time they make a play they're just bitching about the refs, and it's like, guys, just play better football. It's not even like this is like, we're not talking about the 2018 or the 2019 or the 2022 Chiefs. These Chiefs suck. These Chiefs are like 2/3 as good as they ever were, and they're still so much better than everybody in football. How about we just stop complaining about the refs and get better at football? Like, it can't be that hard.
Yeah, no, I
Anyway,
agree. Yeah, I agree. I'm ready for my picks.
give me your
I'll
picks.
go first. Yeah, I've got Chiefs over Buffalo. I've got Kansas City winning, not only winning that game, I've got them winning this game comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
I've got Philly over Commanders in a very close game. I've got Kansas City over Philadelphia in the Super Bowl by uh, 10 plus points.
Yeah, I think I've got the same. I think I talked myself into Commanders. So I've got Kansas City. I've got the Commanders. Um, in a game that I hope makes Jerry Jones wake up and realize that he's been running the Cowboys wrong for 30 years. Because it was so galling. I mean, I talked about how this is the longest stretch in Baltimore pro football without a championship. I mean, the Cowboys are now the only team since 2010 to have not played in an NFC Championship game, and it's like, Jerry, you're
I
not.
love the stat.
Yeah, you're not in a coma. Like you gotta like get some actual football people in here. Anyway, yeah, no. I granted, this tends to be my Super Bowl pick every year. Is I kind of tend to choose like the Chiefs against who I think like the romantic or likable opponent is,
Sure,
and
sure.
then it's like, oh, Mahomes adds to his legacy against a player who's just getting started. Yeah, that's what I'll pick this year. I'll just I'll keep going with it. I'll keep sticking with my gut. I really think the Commanders are going to go in there and culture shock the Eagles, probably in a close win. I think that. I think that the Chiefs are ready to completely unload all of the ammunition they've been holding on to put
Yep,
down this Bills team, because they know that as soon as they beat the Bills team, the title is theirs.
yep.
And I think, yeah, I will go ahead and just assume that whoever is in the NFC Championship game, that the Chiefs will win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I hope,
Mm-hmm.
just some closing statements here.
Go
I
ahead.
hope Josh Allen gets the same amount of criticism Lamar's getting because you want to talk about Lamar not performing in the playoffs. Allen's right there with him. Has not shown anything. I mean, hasn't gotten to a Super Bowl yet. Consistently loses to
No,
Patrick Mahomes. So, I hope that I see the same amount of criticism for Josh Allen.
and if we had more time to talk, we could make a subject of this. But I'll tell you what, it really should be. I don't think winning the MVP for figuring out how to not be a gunslinger and figuring out how to take care of the ball, I think that's valid. What I think is absolutely ridiculous is that he's getting praised for a game plan the Bills are running that seems to minimize him in the way that the Eagles seem to try and minimize Jalen Hurts.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean,
It's funny you touch on that because
mhm.
I think more and more fans are starting to pick up on that.
Yeah, it's just like it's like okay, as long as we can keep Lamar's, as long as we can keep Josh Allen stupid in a stupid cage, then then we can't lose. I mean, granted they don't
Yeah,
have the offense for him to even try a lot of that stuff, but yeah,
sure,
no, it's
sure. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, granted, if he comes through, I'll show some respect, but that at the same time, it's like hey, Lamar has a lot of playoff losses because twice he's managed to skip the wild card round.
sure.
Josh Allen has a great record and great stats as a playoff quarterback. Almost all of that is in the wild card round against these 7 seeds who, as we've discussed, should not be in the playoffs. All right, let's
Yep.
go ahead and cut it there. This has been, the Away Game Sports Podcast with Dron Pierpali and Kyle Clements. Kyle, thank you very much for joining me today. I think another great show in the books.
Yeah, great show. Enjoyed talking. Loved your last part about minimizing Allen and Hurts. We're gonna have to get into that next week
Yeah, no, especially if they lose,
because that is a rabbit hole that I think some fans are starting to figure out.
yeah, no, and that's the thing that makes his MVP case so silly. I mean, it's like we almost made Hurts the MVP in 2022, but then you look back at it and it's like so much of his expected points was on fourth down conversions, and Allen has
Yep.
all of these goal line touchdowns, which are especially when you've got good line play, kind of automatic and all this stuff. Yeah, that's a real Cracker Barrel to open. All right, yeah, great. Talk to you next time, buddy.
Thank you.